This is the AWA car phone that one of the original vehicles we used to work in. You have to pick it up and then hopefully you could press the button in the middle here and talk and call. I joined the Ambulance Service in New South Wales in 1976 and retired in 2011. I was living in Adelaide, born and bred in Adelaide, and had relatives that joined the St John Ambulance Volunteers in Adelaide. In those days, the ambulance service in Adelaide was run by volunteers at night time and all weekend. The only full time from Monday to Friday. So I joined the volunteers. I did the road work and also trained into the control room. Decided that was part of my line of career I think I wanted to go through. So I ended up joining the military and was selected to go to Vietnam for the Vietnam War. As a medic, I trained as a medic, did nursing up in the military hospital in Brisbane, and then come back to New South Wales, then got posted from there direct to Vietnam. And in Vietnam I served with the prestigious Australian Army training team, or advisory team, where I was a medic advisor living in the villages with the Vietnamese, and also two of us would go on operations with the Vietnamese out whatever the time said, a week, 2 weeks, whatever you had to do. We did heli-borne operations, we did walking operations, we did ambushes, all those type of stuff. From there, come back, I got out of the military and I went to South Australian Ambulance again as a full-time officer in Adelaide. And in those days, one of the funniest things is, at 7 o'clock at night, you get out of your ambulance after being there all day, and you have to get back into the same ambulance as a volunteer. It was compulsory to do voluntary work. So from there, my wife and I were only just newly married then after I come back from Vietnam. We got transferred to Mount Gambier on the Victorian South Australian border, where I did my country stay. I also got promoted there eventually and stopped there as the, you'd call it centre officer in those days, would be like the station officer in New South Wales, or station manager. Then I noted, my wife had come from Sydney, so I noted that they were going to start intensive care paramedics in New South Wales. So I took the opportunity to apply, and I got selected to get into the ambulance service. I got posted to Summerhill. Back in the, very rare you had two men on a car. You used to do single operations, which is rather interesting to run around at night by yourself and hopefully get some backup if somebody was having a go at you. I then applied for the intensive care paramedics, and in 1978 I managed to get in and become an intensive care paramedic. I got posted to Parramatta Station in Sydney, and in those days there was no intensive care vehicle north or west or south from Parramatta. So we run some very long distances, mostly where people are trapped and things like that, or we did hospital transfers. And because even those days there were very few helicopters around the place. And during that time also, I was one of the first ones that was selected to do helicopter type work with the police helicopter, because a lot of people don't realise before Westpac and Careflight and all those type companies come into vogue, we're actually crewing the police helicopter out of Mascot. But then Westpac got a little bit of control. We actually had a helicopter pad at Parramatta Station, where we get on for day shift and take that. From there also, during my career, I was able to move around, doing acting positions. I also become an operational control officer. Sydney first, got trained there, then I got transferred out to Penrith, which was basically most of the time a single man operator, so you take your own O calls, you try to get the ambulances out, and then try to have big maps out on the ground, on the floor, trying to work out where they are in the bush, because you didn't have all the rescue people that you've got these days. I worked at other various stations throughout. I worked as intensive care at Penrith, Bankstown, and eventually I was able to get a new one into Blacktown, where I live. And from there I got, due to circumstances, I've become the station manager there, transferred to there. From there I was again selected to do corporate work in regards to capital works, routine maintenance, insurance claims for the whole of Sydney metropolitan area. They had a corporate manager doing it, but as a carpenter type person, but he could never ever catch the station manager of what was wrong. But he'd go through the system and he'd make an appointment to see that manager. And of course the manager would be out on the road when you get there, so they brought me in to do that link, so I could actually go to a job. If I go in to meet that station manager and they weren't there, I could listen on the ambulance radio because I had an ambulance vehicle. I could then follow them to the job, keep my intensive care skills up, as well as talk about the subject at the hospital usually. But it gave me an insight into the corporate world of the ambulance service, how everything clicks and how to manoeuvre around the system. And at the same time, we had two bariatric patients in where I was, area, and we were struggling with trying to transport them in the back of an F100, take the stretcher out, try to drag them in on the fire mat. And so one day I was working out on the road, come back, and there was this blue stretcher on the ground. And it was said, for bariatric patients, please let us know where to go. That was the training I got. No training, no nothing. So we managed to work that out, and then on top of that, we about 2 years later, the service was changing styles of vehicles, so they thought, well, I'll get a truck to go with the stretcher. And when I got again, out working, they must have waited till I went out on the road. When I went out on the road, there's a truck sitting there. Fudge, here's a truck to go with the stretcher. Please let us know how it goes. It became my baby, I suppose. I become unintentional expert in bariatric transports. Then, because the workload was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, I got trying to impress everybody, look around. The bariatric world is becoming a big issue for ambulance officers around the state. We need to expand the unit. So I got taken off the road and put with the Special Operations Group. Then when September 11th happened, by the way, we only had 2 trucks then, the then manager, George Smith, was looking to get specialist vehicles for his CBR type scenario. And I said, we've got an idea here. We need extra vehicles. You give me the money and we'll get new vehicles. So we got 4 vehicles. They got 2 extra vehicles, and we were able to design with the fleet manager, design vehicles and expand the unit. But then they were called multi-purpose vehicles. We also made sure that the vehicles would do other work. Any patient that couldn't fit in the normal ambulance, we could bring them by one of these truck runs. And unbeknownst to us that the swine flu was going to hit. And when the swine flu hit, I got a call on a Friday night saying, from medical retrieval unit, so we've got this patient up in Tamworth. It's going to be hooked up to all the heart-lung bypass scenarios, but the equipment's so big, so heavy, so cumbersome, they've got no idea how to get the patient to Sydney. They knew if they put it on the normal retrieval system, the patient would never make the airport. So they said, so we started that, we transported 18 over the period, and it was a logistical nightmare trying to move these people from long distances. Because you've got to think of trivia things. People have got, staff are working 24 hours a day. You've got to fly specialists in, fly staff in, fly relief staff in. So from there, other states and territories started to come on board, and so we started to train them. And I put on an international seminar at Bankstown during this whole period to show how the workload is just increasing. And I know today, there's 18 more vehicles being signed off to come on board shortly in the New South Wales ambulance. Also, Canberra, involved with Canberra ambulance, Queensland ambulance, Western Australian ambulance, Tasmanian ambulance, and South Australia, to understand that it's an issue that needs to look at a vehicle, not just for bariatric work, but look at a vehicle for generalistic work, so it's more cost efficient for public purse. The proudest moment was when I was given the Ambulance Service Medal for peer debriefing. Unexpected. When I got the letter from the Governor-General's office, it's a gold-coloured letter up the front, And the first thing my wife said to me, "Who have you upset now?" I said, "Hang on a minute," till we shaped it up and found out what it was, because you don't know who nominated you, you'll never know that. And then you had to accept whether you wanted on Australia Day or Queen's Honour Day. And then you went to Government House to have the Governor present it to you. So I think it was pretty proud, for, not only for me, but also for the work my other fellow peers, to represent them, what they did too. Peer support back in my days, I think I was about the second or third course of the peer support group. And myself and another guy in Sydney named Terry Savage, him and I were flat chat. And we'd work all hours of day and night, everywhere. So we were able to hopefully get people to keep at work, because the issue with, and it still is today, the issue with people who've got a mental problem, and I don't mean that derogatory, I mean that some sight, sounds or smell has upset somebody, the professionals don't work midnight, they don't work Saturdays and Sundays. So peer debriefing is the best way to go, because at least you've got somebody to talk to. And having multi-peer debriefers, you've got a choice of people, just in case you don't get on with that person that you potentially could talk to. So it was very rewarding, very difficult at times. So it was really good. Having ex-South Australian type contacts, I found out that a small group of them had started a little retirement group, because they had a gentleman that unfortunately committed suicide within 6 months of leaving the job, and his wife had said that he couldn't cope with being divorced from the ambulance service, and no one could understand what that meant. He'd worked for the service 40 years, and he was unfortunately, he couldn't cope. 6 months later, the psychiatrists call it detachment syndrome. So you're married to your partner and you're married to the work. The longer you work for any organisation, the more attached you become. So that's how it all comes about. So my wife and I decided, we went to South Australia, we were invited to see how they run their organisation. We went over there and then come back, and we decided to do a research. We found the same problem here in New South Wales. So we decided to start up, it was called a caravan group in those days, now it's called a travel group. We all get together every 3 months, the group makes a decision where we're going next, and we talk. And the object of the game is to talk it out of your system, to start to speak normal language at happy hour and things like that. The other interesting part we've found over the years, that the partners can be just as frustrated and angry with the government organisation, because they become single parents. Because that partner, especially if you work in the rural community, you're really married to the job. So whether you were made to go out for that night with a family for school function, something like that, well, you get a job and never come back. So you become a single parent. That makes them so they need to talk it out of their system too. My partner was supported me very well, especially when I went to the country, where again we only had 2 young children, so schooling wasn't an issue. But she still spent a lot of time by herself, because 11 o'clock at night, I'd disappear and go 5.5 hours one way to Adelaide, and wouldn't come back for 24 hours later. And on call throughout all the hours of the day and night. Was handy at times, because she'd hit me in the side and say, "What's the light doing on?" at 3 o'clock in the morning, because we used to take our own phone calls. And I'd look at her and say, "I don't know, you tell me." She'd say, "Well, look at your writing pad." "Oh, look at that, there's a job there, I better go and do it." Because freezing cold, you go back to sleep. It's a natural occurrence. Mind you, working in that country area, there's a lot of fog and a lot of cattle and that, so you can never get to anywhere quick anyway. I was lucky that I wanted to support my wife to go into nursing. So she did her career in the university way of doing nursing and graduated. And so then it was lucky, because then she had that connection of medical understanding. So we could talk about medical work, except our children used to say to us, they go, "Oh, Mum and Dad, stop it. We're having tea here." But it ended up being a lot more flexibility, a lot more understanding of the career. I'll go right back to my beginnings in South Australia. I was lucky to have 2 mentors That one come from the horse and cart days. He'd been in that long, and he had no highfalutin medical experience, but his road knowledge was fantastic. I learnt a lot off him, how to react to a scene, react to big jobs, little jobs, how to stop and think what you're doing. And I think that I was lucky with that because they were really, really good. And when I come here to New South Wales, I was lucky to, when I got into the intensive care, to have a few people that were even though that we're only new, I was course 5, still only new in the system. I was lucky to be able to train off them, where the training was hard. Our taskmaster was Dr. Bob Wright initially. A very hard taskmaster, but once you get through, you know why he did it, because we were new to the system, new to the medical world. So we were going to get bullied, harassed, threatened by all walks of life, from the medical side I'm referring to now, because we're just too new and no one could understand us. But he taught us how to stand on our own 2 feet. It was all, we did the didactic phase first, and then we moved to, we had to get 80% or higher pass mark on everything. Then we moved to St Vincent's Hospital. The didactic phase was at St Vincent's Hospital under Dr. Bob Wright. And he called a spade a shovel all the time, and he would test you out. If he gave you a lecture, or somebody give you a lecture at 4 o'clock the day before, he'd expect one of you next day to get up and discuss the lecture. And none of us could do it, of course. And if there was a real patient in intensive care, he'd take you in. We had cardiology was done by a nurse educator, Valda her name was. She was brilliant. She could come down to our level and teach us. I had a lot of trouble with ECGs to start with, and my course coordinator kept saying, "I'll hit you like a sledgehammer one of these days." I said, "Well, Pete, it's close because the exam's coming, the final exams." And it did. What happened was we come back from lunch, walking down the corridor, and Valda had been running late. As we went past her office, she yelled out to the educator, "I need somebody," and I just got pushed aside and shoved as the first person. And by pure fluke, I ended up coming top of the ECG part. If I would have waited until later, I would have been nervous as anything. So yes, and then from there you went to the hospitals. I did mine at the Repat Hospital those days, at Concord, where it was learning to look at old veins and search for old veins. We were well accepted by the anaesthetist. One day when I was in theatre with one of the anaesthetists, and he said, "I'm due to go in emergency department after this. You want to join me?" So I went down. He said, "Everybody coming through this door will get a cannula." I said, "But not everybody needs a cannula." He said, "Son, I'm telling you, everybody's going to cannula, and you're going to do it." So coughs, colds, all got cannulas. AWA radios, the real old one we used to use, was a little handset thing. Never ever worked properly, but that's by the by. It wouldn't communicate over buildings and around corners. And then when we started to get some of the new modern type radios, the same thing. We had a lot of trouble with radio communications. You'd have to rely on somebody coming past the scene if you're in a car accident, and if you wanted help, to get them to either drive to the nearest farmhouse and ring up, or drive back into town, hopefully, to find a phone to ring up. Communication is an issue that around the whole state, where there's blind spots everywhere. And even with the bariatric world, when we did that, I had to get sat phones for the trucks to be able to get communication, because they were a niche vehicle, and because they were going from point A to point B doesn't mean some other operation centre wanted them. So they had to be able to contact them. In Sydney, single operator, you're on your own. Unless you get a phone and the phone happened to be alongside you. The portable radios come into vogue eventually, but they didn't have very good range. I ended up having a large fight with a patient one night. I was on call, and only reason I could get to the phone because there was a phone alongside the bed. Portable radio didn't work. The duress button didn't work. So I managed to get the phone, and then because I'd worked in the control room regularly, in and out type scenarios, relief, when I called up the phone, the operator said to me, "Oh, hello, Jeff, how you going tonight?" Not too good here. Still fighting with the patient, of course. Communications are vital, but they are poor at times. If you do trips into the rural community, you're often running out of communications, which is just acceptable. But not acceptable, you have to just you learn to work around it. In the control room at Penrith, when I worked up there, that was, if you're there by yourself at night time, that was the hardest part, trying to stay awake. So they had a big bell in there, big cowbell, it was huge. And you could flick that on to hopefully 000 calls. If that set the bell, or any phone calls will come in and set the bell off, because you would fall asleep. It was just human nature, just sitting there. No noise, no nothing. Back many years ago, the then guy here, who's now unfortunately passed away, Eddie Sams, he had F.J. Holden here, and he wanted a couple of parts for it, medical parts, because he belonged to the car club and he had this for years. And so he made a phone call, who made somebody else a phone call, and eventually come to me and said he wants some parts. Then we had an issue where 2 or 3 guys were religiously putting stuff in and trying to restore medical equipment at Auburn Ambulance Station, but they were getting a lot of pressure put on them to get rid of it. So the then acting chief executive officer called me up and said, do you want to get involved? So I did, and we got, myself and another guy got sent down here to check it out that it's bona fide. I got a group together. The first load we took out of Auburn was 3/4 of a Pantech truck full of gear down to here. And from there, it never stops, because I go, my wife and I go all around touring with our private touring, but combining it with the museum. We take a caravan or a trailer or whatever we got, and we usually go out empty and come back full, somewhere in New South Wales. And I have a letter from the current Chief Executive, Dominic Morgan, to be able to approach ambulance stations to gear, because one of the biggest issues that you find, some of this equipment or has been sitting in these ambulance stations for 50 or 60 years and no one knew what to do with it. So I go in there and realise it's heritage, and then purloin it, put it in the back of the car and take it away and bring it down to here, to Temora Museum. Now in the Temora Museum I managed right in the early days to convince, because Canberra ambulances, ACT ambulance is also involved here at the Temora Museum, I managed to convince governments to put it through both their governments that any of the ambulances down here that belong to the government departments, they can use it in the film industry and lease them out to the film industry, and they get about $1,000 a week to make money. So recently I hired out 7 bags to a film just about 2 months ago now, and got $400 for 7 bags for 3 weeks. So it's just they didn't want anything inside them, they just wanted the bags themselves. So from there, we've also now realised, because we've overflow to the overflow sheds, I keep filling up, we'll need a bigger building, and we've got the building approved except for one last committee, and the current building is 500 square metres, the new one will be 5,000 square metres, double storey, with a theaterette and everything in it, to be able to educate it. Also, the museum, the manager here, current manager here, wants to make the Ambulance Museum a research centre. So you will be able to, in years to come, people that are studying universities will be able to come down here and use this and actually do proper research, which will benefit the ambulance officers of that particular era. I mean, I'm very pro the university, because I did the first course. I graduated as we had to do a 6-subject adjunct course, because they were already intensive care paramedic. So we're the first course in New South Wales. So it's a good thing to do, to get both worlds together.